new boss. Hasn't even met the guy yet. And I'll warn, I know we got some high school and college students here, do not do this in your first job interview. This is like top 10 things you're not supposed to do. My dad tells his new boss before he even meets him, he goes, that's great, I'll start work Monday. But he says, look, I don't have a car, I don't have a driver's license. You're going to have to pick me up on the way to work. Only my dad would do that, by the way. But he was so enthusiastic to work, his boss did exactly that. He went and got him. 6 months later, I was born at Women's Hospital. I was what you would politely call a pre-existing condition. All that meant was my parents' insurance didn't cover me. But I love what my parents did next. My dad went to the doctor after I was born. No government forms, no paperwork, no contracts. My dad went to that doctor, looked him in the face, and said, I want to send you a check every month until I pay this bill in full. And then they shook hands in the hospital, and that's exactly what my dad did. It was a simpler time back then. Just what parents did. I asked my dad, though, how do you pay for a baby on layaway? I mean, if you miss a payment, do they take the baby back? He said I was such a bad little baby, he would have missed a payment. But he said, don't worry, you're paid for. Nobody's coming to get you. My parents, they chased the American dream. They caught the American dream. They have lived the American dream. I want my children. I want your children. One day I want my grandchildren to be able to live that same American dream. That's what makes this election so important. Now look, there are a lot of talkers in this race. There's already a talker in the White House. If talk was all we needed, we'd be doing great right now. We need a doer, not a talker. We have a first term. We have a first-term senator who had never run anything as president of our country. We can't afford on-the-job training. So every Republican will tell you, hey, I'm going to shrink the size of government. I'm going to protect innocent human life. I'm going to fight Common Core. And that's great. But we haven't just talked about those things. We've already done those things. In Louisiana, we have cut our budget 26%, $9 billion. We've got 30,000 fewer state government bureaucrats than the day I took office. 8 credit upgrades. We've had now 25 years of out-migration, 7 years in a row of in-migration. We're a top 10 state for private sector job growth, statewide school choice, and we privatized our charity hospital system. Now look, there's another side to this. When you do that, this is what the left is going to say. Well, you know, with that governor, they're always doing government cuts. There's never enough money in government. And to my critics, this is what I say. Absolutely. Guilty as charged. Because the reality is this. You've got to choose. Do we measure prosperity by how people are doing in the government sector or how they're doing in the real world? That's the fundamental choice in this election. Now, you'll have Republicans who will come tell you they're going to fight ISIS. They're going to come tell you they're going to repeal Obamacare, and they'll do all these things. We're not going to just talk about those things. We're going to do those things. And here's the challenge we've got. We need to elect somebody who's going to say and do the things you're not supposed to be able to say and do. Look, the reality is the Supreme Court had a couple of awful rulings a couple of weeks ago. Began their week by saying that words no longer have meanings. Don't read dictionaries anymore, I guess. They saved Obamacare by rewriting the law. Then later that week, they try to redefine marriage. Chief Justice says that they're not reading the Constitution. So to recap, in 1 week, you've got the Supreme Court not reading the Constitution, not reading a dictionary. I was in Iowa when the ruling came down. I volunteered this. I said, if they're not going to read the Constitution, if they're not going to read a dictionary, maybe we can save some money and just get rid of the court altogether. Maybe we don't need this court. Well, I want to share with you a secret. There were Republicans in D.C. happy the court ruled the way they ruled. They view marriage as a distraction. They don't want to roll up their sleeves and do the hard work to repeal and replace Obamacare. You tell those Republicans we've got to get term limits done. We've got to shrink the budget, not just slow the growth rate. We've got to hunt down and kill ISIS, not contain and degrade them. They'll tell you, well, you can't talk like that. You can't do those things. If we can't do those things, we're done. Look, it's not enough to send a Republican to the White House. We need to send somebody who's going to make big changes. And I'll tell you about the court. Look, unlike Hillary Clinton and President Obama, my views on marriage aren't, quote, evolving. I don't care what any earthly court says. My Christian view of a marriage is between a man and a woman. And I do support federal efforts to give us our 10th Amendment rights back as states, as well as to define marriage as being between a man and a woman. But now the left is going after our First Amendment rights. Now they're going after our religious freedom rights. I did an executive order in May saying the state of Louisiana would not discriminate against individuals or businesses that have a traditional view of marriage. Last Monday, the ACLU decided to sue me for that. Now, the ACLU was for religious freedom until they were against it. They used Louisiana's Religious Freedom Restoration Act to protect the rights of religious minorities, and I'm glad they did it. But now that Christians, now that Catholics, evangelical Christians are being now discriminated against for our beliefs, now the ACLU is on the other side of this fight. Shouldn't surprise us. Remember, Hillary Clinton said several weeks ago, she said, those of us that are pro-life need to have our religious views changed. Well, I'll tell you something. My religious views are not between me and Hillary Clinton. My religious views are between me and God Almighty, and I'm not changing them because she doesn't like them, because the New York Times doesn't like them, or because the Washington Post doesn't like them. I'm proud that Louisiana has been voted the most, not voted, but ranked the most pro-life state the last 6 years in a row. And so I want to say this slowly so that even Hillary Clinton can understand this. The United States of America did not create religious liberty. Religious liberty created the United States of America. Make no mistake about it. The left wants to take God out of the public square. They want to change our country to something the founding fathers never would have recognized, something your parents would never have recognized, to a country I don't want my children to recognize. Founding fathers anticipated this fight. That's why they put this in the First Amendment to the Constitution. You know, I've got a novel idea to the Republican Party. There are those that don't want to talk about these issues, that want to hide from these issues. I've got a novel idea. Why not for a difference? Why not for a change? Why don't we try embracing our own principles? Jeb Bush says that we've got to be willing to lose the primary in order to win the general election. I couldn't disagree with that more. I want to translate that for you into just everyday English. That's the establishment saying that we've got to hide our conservative beliefs. We've got to try to make the left and the media like us. That never works. If we try to do that again, we will lose again, and we will deserve to lose again. This election is not about the Republican Party. It is not about Iowa. It's not about Louisiana. It is about the United States of America. Look, I believe our best days are ahead of us. I believe we can dominate this century. But I believe we also have to make the right choices, and we've got to be willing to be politically incorrect. I wish this president would declare war on radical Islamic terrorism instead of apologizing for America, instead of criticizing medieval Christians. I wish he would say this. I don't know it's not politically correct, but I wish he would say to those Muslim clerics and leaders. They must denounce not just generic acts of violence, but the individuals by name, committing these terrorist acts, and say they are not martyrs. They're not going to enjoy a reward in the afterlife, but rather they're going straight to hell where they belong. And I wish he would also say to those religious leaders, you need to embrace freedom for others with different beliefs than yours. The same freedom you want for yourself, you need to explicitly recognize for others. We've got a president who won't even name the enemy. This week he has announced an additional cut to the strength of our army by 40,000 troops. Smallest number since before World War II. Goes to the Pentagon and says, we're not going to beat ISIS with guns. So apparently he says this is a generational conflict. We're going to have to change their hearts and minds. These are terrorists that are beheading, raping, torturing, killing Christians and others in the Middle East, but not just the Middle East. They're trying to bring their war here. Remember what happened in Garland, Texas? By the way, I'm glad that that guy had a gun. Maybe Texas, Iowa, Louisiana aren't the best place to try that foolishness, by the way. In our states, we think gun control is being able to hit your target, hit what you're shooting at. If General Patton and Eisenhower had said we were going to win World War II with propaganda, the French would be speaking German right now. The reality is this: Islam has got a problem, and that problem is radical Islam. We need a commander-in-chief, we need a president who believes in American exceptionalism, who believes we do live in the greatest country in the world. As your commander-in-chief, we will get four things done. Number one, we will repeal and replace all of Obamacare and replace it with a conservative, patient-driven plan. And so far, I'm the only candidate to offer a detailed plan on how to do that. Secondly, we will stop talking about it. We will simply secure the border. No amnesty, no compromise. The only thing a 1,000-page bill is good for is if we stacked it up against the border. We don't need 1,000 pages to tell us to secure the border. Third, we're going to shrink the size of the federal government and grow the private sector. And fourth and finally, we're going to invest in our military so our friends trust us, our enemies fear us. We're going to stand with Israel. We're going to stop Iran from becoming a nuclear power. I want to close with this. I'm not just asking you to join a campaign. I'm asking you to join a cause. I'm asking you to believe again. Believe in America. Believe in ourselves. My dad taught me as a young child that Americans could do anything. I believed him then, and I believe him now. I think you believe as well. I think you want to believe again. I think you've been frustrated by these last 7 years. Ronald Reagan famously described us as that shining city on a hill. But he also reminded us that it wasn't inevitable. He said every generation has to choose for itself to renew those principles of freedom. Previous generations have spilled great blood and treasure to give us the ability to live in the greatest country in the history of the world. This is our time. This is our time to choose. We've got to choose to restore our country, put us back on the right path. We mustn't become the first generation that mortgages our children's future and leaves fewer opportunities than those we inherited from our own parents. The Founding Fathers got something essential right. They knew the greatness of America wasn't in our government, but rather it was a limited government securing our God-given rights. It was freedom. Freedom to the entrepreneurs to create something from nothing. Freedom for the moms and dads to raise their kids according to their own values. It is time to believe again.
Amen.
Please go to bobbyjindal.com, learn more about how together we can take our country back. God bless y'all. Thank y'all very much for coming out today. Very much for that. Now I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to take your questions, comments. Doesn't have to be on anything I've talked about. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I have worked for a company that went overseas. I took Obama's easy go back to school plan, uprooted my family back to Cedar Rapids, where I'm originally from, and have worked for 3 companies that have laid me off. All while having student debt, which is doing nothing to help me out. I understand that you understand the education, so as an American, I'd like to know what you're going to do for people like me who believed that that was the route we were supposed to take.
Sure, absolutely. Well, a couple of things. First of all, how do we keep those jobs here, not overseas? And then second, about student debt. 2 very good questions. First, jobs here. America's got the highest tax rate in the developed world. So now you get companies with trillions of dollars overseas instead of building factories here. That makes no sense. We need a lower, flatter tax code. And by the way, the Republican Party, we're not the party of big government. Let's not become the party of big business either. That means no special treatment or carve-outs for either side. I don't want those companies using tax dodges, but I also don't want them paying the highest tax rate in the world. Second, affordable energy can mean more manufacturing jobs here. My wife talked about the tens of billions of dollars, $60 billion coming to Louisiana, including steel, petrochemical, fertilizer companies. Nucor, a steel company coming to Louisiana, almost went to Brazil instead because of the EPA. 1,250 direct jobs, $3 billion plus investment, average pay $75,000 a year. These aren't minimum wage jobs, these are good paying jobs with benefits. These are the kinds of jobs we need in America. We fought, we convinced them to stay here. They built the first phase. But them going to Brazil doesn't help the environment, doesn't help the economy. We need to rein in the EPA and all these crazy regulations.
Yeah.
I would make it so there's an independent cost-benefit analysis. And secondly, if any regulation costs over $100 million to the economy, Congress needs to vote on it. We have too much power, these unelected bureaucrats. We also need to repeal and replace Obamacare. You have all this uncertainty on companies so they don't know whether they can hire or not. We have the lowest participation rate in the workforce right now that we've had in decades. Make no mistake about it, though, the left celebrates dependence. They think it's a good thing people are dependent on government. We think it's better when people have good paying jobs. So there are things we can do. You know, this president likes to take credit for the energy revolution when he's actually trying to stop it. Won't build the Keystone Pipeline, won't let them produce energy on federal lands. There's a lot that can be done to bring those jobs back. In terms of student debt, so one of the things the Democrats did in Obamacare was they gave the government a monopoly on student loans. Now, a lot of folks are asking, why can't we refinance our debt? If we can get better interest rates, I think there needs to be choice and competition. So one, you can refinance your debt to lower those payments. Secondly, the reason student debt is so onerous is people can't find good paying jobs. At one point during the Great Recession, over half of our college graduates were underemployed or unemployed. And so it makes it a lot harder when you've got debt over $1 trillion accumulated of student debt. Middle class incomes aren't going up. Your premiums didn't go down $2,500 the way that he promised. So break up the monopoly, but also create good paying jobs. Third, what we do in Louisiana, we've got a TOPS program that actually helps folks, helps students with average ACT or GPA to pay their tuition. As a result, in Louisiana, we've got the second lowest tuition in the South. We have one of the lowest rates of student debt in the entire country because of this, in part because of this state TOPS program. But the important thing is when it comes to the federal policies, break up the monopoly so you can lower the payments for students. But most importantly, let's create good paying jobs. I'd also argue for more competition in higher education so we can lower the cost. I suggested that to the president. I said, you basically got an accreditation monopoly. Why not let the states help you break up that monopoly? The president said, well, we can't trust the states to do that. Students would get ripped off if we all. You listen to that arrogance. You know, he says he's a constitutional scholar. I think he should sue to get his tuition money back. That's like the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, much less the First or Second Amendment. Yes, sir, in the back. Yeah, me too.
Very good points, and you're really a smart guy. How are you going to get through the establishment? How are you going to get rid of John Boehner?
That's a great question. The question was, how do we get through the establishment? Look, in last November, they said, give us the Senate. They said, give us the majority, and we will stop the illegal amnesty. We will repeal Obamacare, and we will shrink the size of the government. None of those things happened. Now, I'm glad a federal court at least has temporarily stopped amnesty, but it wasn't Congress. And I think there are a lot of voters like you and me that are frustrated. That election wasn't about getting Mitch McConnell a bigger office space. If that was all that it was about, let's give it back. I mean, the reality is we're not going to fix Congress until we make structural changes. One of the most dangerous things we've got in Congress is we've got a permanent governing class. The Founding Fathers never intended for them to go up there, live there forever, and then become lobbyists making 6, 7-figure salaries. They're supposed to be part-time legislators that live under the same rules they apply to the rest of us. Remember how much they squealed when they had to go under Obamacare themselves? Oh, this is a great health care plan. We know what's best for you, but we don't want to be in it. I think these are the structural changes we need. We need a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. We need a supermajority vote before they raise our taxes or grow government faster than the private sector economy. We need term limits. Fourth, we need a limit, so a prohibition from them becoming lobbyists. Fifth, we need part-time legislators. You know, in Louisiana, we pay them a per diem for every day they go to session. I think we should pay members of Congress a per diem. But pay them every day they don't go to D.C., not for every day they actually go to D.C. Your wallet would be safer if they would stay home more often. But to your point, it's not going to change. We always think if we just send some more Republicans there, it'll get better. And as soon as they go there, they become captive. They become part of the problem. We've got to break this. I was there in Congress for 2 terms. I'd say I was sentenced for 2 terms. It almost feels like I served a term. You go there, and you see that in both parties, they go along to get along. And that's part of the problem. Look, let's give President Obama this backhanded compliment. He had Congress for 2 years. Got $1 trillion stimulus plan and Obamacare done. When we last had the majority in both chambers and the White House, what did we get done with it? Well, now, I give them credit. They kept us safe after 9/11, but other than that, we got No Child Left Behind, which I don't like. So where were the conservative reforms that got done? So I think to break up that establishment, you have to fundamentally structurally change the way that D.C. works. Reagan got tax cuts and won the Cold War of the Democratic Congress because he went to the people. He went around Congress and said, this is what I'm going to do. They are interested in, one of the things they're actually interested in is self-preservation. And if they know we're going to fire them, they'll actually vote the way we want them. That's the only way you'll get their attention, is to vote the way we want. But you're exactly right. It doesn't change if you just send a couple of extra Republicans. The more we send, the more it seems to stay the same. It takes structural changes to fix what's going on in D.C. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to know how we get the Republicans to stick together, and then how we get the candidates to stick on the issues and not kill one another off.
That's a great question. You know, last time it seemed like we spent more time beating ourselves up than going after President Obama. I think the way to do that is let's be specific about what we are for. So I've offered detailed plans on energy, on education, on defense, on health care. Let's go tell the American people. I don't think it's just Republicans. I think independents and even some Democrats say, we know President Obama's policies didn't work. Tell us what you're going to do instead. Tell us how you're going to beat ISIS. Tell us how you're going to grow the economy. Tell us how you're going to fix health care. And we'll have honest disagreements within the Republican Party. That's okay. We don't have to engage in ad hominem attacks. We don't have to attack each other by name or individually. We can just say, this is what I'm for. And if you want somebody that believes this, vote for me. There are enough candidates you can vote for who you want. You don't have to go vote against somebody. That's a great thing. Look, I do think if the establishment tries to clear the field or pick a nominee, I think there will be a backlash from the voters. I think voters in Iowa and New Hampshire and other states say, we're smart enough to pick for ourselves. We don't need you picking for us. But I think the best way is to insist on to candidates, tell us what you're for. Tell us what you've actually already done. Show us that you actually mean what you're. Don't just promise us what you think we want to hear. Tell us what you've already done and show us what you're going to do if we put you in that office. We've been fooled too many times as it is. Yes, sir.
It just seems like there's a madness that's permeating our society, and that is because our politicians are making decisions based on power, money, and votes. And they just try to keep us divided, because every division, every controversy is another fundraiser for the parties, the politicians, and the media. Why can't we change this whole perspective and start working together, seeking the best decisions for the American people? Our whole way of functioning is destroying us.
No, I think, look, let me share with you my experience when I went to D.C. So when I went to Congress, the first thing they give you, because one of the things that happens that sometimes it's hard to perceive is there's this bubble in D.C. where they see the world differently. Because to your point, we're all Americans first. And that's before we are Republicans or Democrats or whatever else we identify ourselves with. But when you get to D.C., you get separated into a different category. And it's not Democrat or Republican, it's you become part of the governing class. And this is what happens. Democrat or Republican, you get a pin that you get to put on your jacket that allows you to go in the secret hallways of Congress. Nobody else is allowed to go there. You get a license plate to put on your car. Now, if you're in the House like I was, it has H and a number. Number 1 is the most senior person in the House. Number 435, that's the most junior person. I was always in the 400s, by the way. But they quickly tell you your worth based on how long you've been there. And then they give you a card that only you're allowed to vote. No staff member, nobody else is allowed to vote. One day I was driving my little car around, I was in the Longworth building, I was looking for a parking spot at Grayburg. And all the parking spots were marked reserved. No parking. So I'm driving around, like, just waiting, looking for an opening. There's no opening. And finally, I guess a Capitol policeman, it was early in the morning, a Capitol policeman comes out there. What is wrong with you? And he says that. He goes, what's wrong with you? What are you doing? I said, well, there's no parking. It's all reserved. And he kind of looks at me with disgust and says, not for you. You can park wherever you want. He points at a license plate. And I realized then that you could probably almost park on the Capitol lawn and they wouldn't tow your car if you've got one of those special license plates. And with that pin, you don't have to wait in the metal detector lines. You get to go around the lines. But that voting card, that's the real power. Because you see, when you win an election, your jokes get funnier. You get smarter, you get better looking. It's amazing how that works. There was a guy when I ran, he endorsed one of my opponents. When I won, he came to see me. He said, Bobby, I was secretly for you. I don't even know what that means. I said, next time I want you to be secretly for the other guy, publicly endorse me. I'd rather you do it that way. So I used to tell my colleagues up on the Hill, I'd say, I want you to try something. Next time somebody comes to see a lobbyist or some group comes to see you, say the dumbest thing you could ever think of. Because they'll bend over backwards to agree. They'll bend over backwards to try to, kiss up to you. So, for example, if you told them the next time they come to your office, the sun rose in the west today, it was amazing. Chances are they tell you, Congressman, that's brilliant. I thought there was something strange about the sun this morning. I didn't know what happened. Nobody's willing to say the emperor's got no clothes. And to your point, our country is going over a cliff right now, and you've got this permanent governing class in both parties. They're more interested in themselves, not interested in making the tough decisions. Look, we've got a bunch of math deniers in D.C. 1 + 1 = 2, unless you happen to live in D.C. Or if you take Common Core math. Those are the only two people who don't understand this. They know Social Security and Medicare are going broke, and they won't say anything about it. The reality is we will be the next Greece if we don't change course, if we don't change direction. And they're not saying anything about it. And it's in both parties. So to your point, let's put our country first. Let's be willing to speak the hard truths, make the tough choices. This is a great country. I think the American people are a lot smarter than our politicians give us credit for. We know what's going on, but it takes somebody to say the emperor's got no clothes. It takes somebody to say, look, incremental change isn't good enough. And that's why I say it's not enough. Just sending a Republican's not going to fix all of our problems. We thought that would fix the problems by getting us the majority in the Congress. We need somebody willing to upset the apple cart and say enough's enough. Well, I think that you've got to be willing to go there and say this election isn't about me. It isn't about a political party, and it isn't about poll numbers. This is about the future of our country. Now, if you take that seriously enough, if you're willing to take them on. You can't worry about, if we wait, if too many Republicans continue to wait for what the New York Times or the Washington Post says about us, we're done. If we wait for the political elite to say good things about us, we're done. We got to go there on the first day, rescind those unconstitutional executive orders. We got to go there on the first day, meet with the Joint Chiefs of Staff and say we're taking the political handcuffs off the military. You never put troops in harm's way unless you have a plan and the support and the resources for them to win. I never want our military in a fair fight. I want them to dominate any potential fight.
What would you be doing for veterans?
Well,
Healthcare, education?
one of the great scandals for veterans, I believe, has been what we've seen in the healthcare system. Now, this got a lot of attention, a lot of headlines. First of all, though, I would like to see some people lose their jobs, their pensions, even maybe some people go to jail. Why is it there's no accountability? The IRS scandal, the Department of Justice scandal, the VA scandal. There's a big headline. Everybody says, oh, there'll be accountability. There are a couple of investigations, and a year later, nothing's happened. Nothing's changed. I bet you if you locked up or fired some bureaucrats, it wouldn't happen again. But going back to the veterans, when it comes to health care, let me just talk about health care for a second first, because this is so important. Congress created a temporary program based around choice. I think there needs to be a permanent, expanded program that tells veterans this. We're going to give you a card. We're going to allow you to get the best health care, wherever that health care is. We will pay for it. Whether it's in the VA, whether it's in the private sector, we will never make a veteran go on a waiting list. We will never make a veteran cross a state line. We will never make a veteran wait. So if the best health care is in a government-run hospital, go there. If you're a private doctor, if your private facility thinks if you think they're better, we trust veterans to make the best decisions for themselves. The reason we need to do that is twofold. One, we need to honor the commitments we made. This isn't an entitlement program. This isn't welfare spending. This is something where we looked at veterans and made a promise to them. And said, if you run towards danger for us, if you put on the nation's uniform and allow us to live in this great country, we're going to take care of your health care needs. So we've got to keep that promise. But then secondly, how do you recruit the next soldier if you're not keeping faith with the ones that are already in the system? As your commander-in-chief, and just all of us as Americans, how can we look those young men and women in the face and say, sign up here when we're not doing what we already said we were going to do for their predecessors? And I can tell you in our state, we've done a lot of things for education. We've done a lot of things. We do a veteran medals program where I recognize the veterans in our state one by one in individual ceremonies all across the state. We've done things to help them with benefits in our state as well. But I think the greatest scandal right now in front of us is how badly we are investing in healthcare. So in Louisiana, we had a VA hospital that was destroyed by Katrina 10 years ago. Federal government said they were going to rebuild it, put $1 billion up. We said, we'll put $1 billion up to rebuild the city, the state on its side. We would do a partnership. We're opening up our hospital before the 10th anniversary. They're still over budget, over deadline. Now they're saying they're going to have to open it up next year, not this year. Now veterans, they'll still be able to get services in the meantime, but unfortunately a lot of them will have to go elsewhere. So I think that the real answer is give the veterans a choice. If they want to get in the VA, great. If they want to go outside the VA, they should be able to do that as well. And we should pay for that as part of keeping our commitment to the veterans.
I'm here today because of your ads, hyphenated Americans. That resonates with me. The other place I think we get divide is the class warfare business. Taxes seem to be a place where that often involves that discussion of this tax policy is good for the middle class, bad for the upper class. Address how you would approach that.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for coming. And here, I'll give you a contrast. So my dad grew up poor. I didn't. He did. And he worked really hard so my brother and I could have the things we needed. Not always the things we wanted, by the way. And you parents know there's a difference between the two. But we were blessed. We never went hungry. We always had clean clothes to wear. We always had a roof on our head. My mom and dad, they didn't buy their first house until I was 7 years old. They couldn't afford it. They waited. And that's just what you did. You saved up. There was nothing wrong with that. We had we lived in married student housing. It was fine. It was comfortable. Here's the difference between the president and my dad. So my dad, who did grow up poor, when he sees somebody who's wealthy, sees somebody driving a nice car, living in a big house, well, my dad says to me and my brother, he'll take us to go see that. The president would tell you, well, that person stole from you. That person cheated you. That person won the lottery. That person didn't build that. My dad didn't say any of those things. My dad would look at that, point that out to my brother, and he'd say, look, if you work hard, you figure out what this person did. Maybe you could do it better. You could live in a house like this. You could drive a car like that. Never once did he think somebody who had something stole from him. He would always be grateful. You live in a great country where nobody can stop you. Nobody can tell you you can't do that. There's a story, I don't know if it's true or not, but I love this story, that Bobby Kennedy came home one day and told his dad, Joe Kennedy, who famously wanted all of his sons to be president of the United States. Bobby Kennedy came home one day and told his dad he wanted to be a Catholic priest instead. So Joseph Kennedy, without missing a beat, the story goes that he says, well, that's great. We've never had a pope in the Kennedy family before. Even though I hate, I disagree with the Kennedy family's politics, what I love about that story is my dad had that kind of, and he's still alive, has that kind of passion and ambition, and there's no reason his children can't do whatever they want in this great country. I'll tell you, remember, my dad's the first in the family to go to college. When I was going off to college, my dad says, look, son, he sits me down. Now, college was very expensive. Even back then, to the question on student debt, college was very expensive. This was something my parents had helped, they had saved, I had saved for years. This wasn't something you paid out of your pocket. For years they've been saving for this. We didn't always take vacations or buy new cars. Instead, college was something they were saving for. So when it was time for me to leave, I'm the oldest, he sits me down and says, son, you can study whatever you want. And you go, I'm so proud you're going to college, you can study whatever you want when you go there. And I know my dad. I know how to press his buttons. So that's great, Dad. I think I might study like French literature. I might study, philosophy, all kinds of things. And my dad, who did not realize I was teasing, my mom got it. My dad didn't realize I was teasing him, says to me very seriously. He goes, son, you could be any kind of doctor you want to be. I think he finally forgave me maybe a year ago that I didn't become a doctor. I think he's just getting over the fact that not every boys became doctors. But my point in all that is you're exactly right. Whether the president's trying to divide us by class or by race or by geography or by gender, by age. So it was remember the seniors going over the cliff in the ads in 2012, or whether it was the war on women, or whether it was his comments in California, we're clinging to God and guns out here. By the way, in Louisiana, we're proud to have both God and guns. We don't apologize for either. We're not The best way to summarize it, they're about redistribution, we're about growth. It doesn't bother me if people do well. I just want all of our children to have the chance to do well. If they're willing to work hard, get a great education, that's why we fought for school choice. The quality of your education shouldn't depend on your zip code. So I think you're right, this divisive rhetoric, and it's disappointing. Because one of the things the president has is the bully pulpit. He can unify us or he can divide us. I was hopeful, maybe this was naive, I was hopeful after he ran his last election, he would stop being the leader of the socialist wing of the Democratic Party and instead be a leader for the entire country. Every president at some point has pivoted and realized, okay, I'm no longer just the head of my political faction. I'm president for everybody, whether they voted for me or not. And unifies us instead of dividing us, instead of demonizing folks in our midst. So I agree with you. And the reason I think it's so important to not have hyphenated Americans, look, we proudly talked about how at one point in this country, not only is this the melting pot, but if folks want to follow the rules, assimilation, integration are so important. I can't stress that enough, and that gets overlooked in the debate today. If we don't insist on that, all you have to do is look to Europe. And I worry about that, because that is a very dangerous, dangerous possibility. We see what's happening in those countries. So I thank you for coming in, and I thank you for asking your question. Yes, sir, back.
You mentioned Common Core and Detroit a couple times. How are you looking to push that down from the federal government, or at least give the state?
That's a great question. So look at how the federal government is trying to force Common Core in the classroom. One, they said if you want your own tax dollars back, you have to do it. And secondly, if you want no child left behind waivers, you have to do it. The federal government was never supposed to be making K-12 curriculum decisions. And the reality is that it's a violation of the 10th Amendment, it's a violation of federal law. We're in federal court to stop them from doing it. But the only way to stop them from doing it in the future is to, and we also pass state laws in our own state, but I'm talking about the only way you can stop them in the future is to shrink the authority, the size, the funding of the Federal Department of Education. billions of dollars on teacher quality programs that don't improve, no research shows it actually improves teacher quality. Either get rid of those programs or block grant those dollars to the states. Title I dollars. Block grant those dollars to the states or let the dollars follow the students so the parents can decide how to spend those dollars for their kids. When it comes to what the Federal Department of Education should be doing, the only things it should be doing. I think Congress needs to enumerate what these bureaucracies should be doing and say nothing more than that. One, it needs to be focused on transparency and portability for parents and deregulation. Two, it needs to be focused on true civil rights enforcement. And then finally, three, it can share, data in terms of, now when I say share data, I'm talking about student data or individual family. They want too much of that as it is. But I'm talking about being a clearinghouse for the states in terms of what works. Beyond that, they really don't need to be telling us, I trust parents and local school boards. For those of you that aren't sure about Common Core, I would just say two things. One, do you really want, I know that right now it's just ELA and math. Just imagine if this administration, however, we're trying to come up with American history standards. They probably wouldn't be teaching American history the way you and I learned it. It'd be about victimhood. It wouldn't be about American exceptionalism. And secondly, on a more practical level, my little boy, I'll share a story. My little boy is now going to be in the 4th grade. When he was in the 2nd grade, when he was about 6 years old, he brought home his Common Core math and test sheets. And he's a good little kid in math, so he got all the answers right now. In 2nd grade, math isn't that complicated. It's 18 plus 4. It's just addition and subtraction. When you and I were learning math, we added the columns, numbers in one column, we carried over the digits. Worked pretty well. I mean, I don't know you, I kind of feel like I learned how to add and subtract. I don't feel like I was really hard by that. Apparently, that's not good enough anymore. So now with Common Core math, you draw circles and rectangles, and 18 plus 4 becomes 20 minus 2 plus 4, and it takes 6 steps to get the answer. So my little boy gets all the answers right on half the test. The other half of the test says, now go and show why your answers are right. I love my boy. But he has the attention span of a gnat. I mean, he's a 6-year-old boy. What do you expect? I mean, I'm just amazed they get him to sit still all day without running outside. And that's just, I mean, he is a boy. That's all he does. And so this is what he'd written for every single question. When they said, all right, now tell us why you're answering, using all these Common Core methods. He said, just because it is. So the teacher sends that home to my wife. She doesn't know what to do with him. Sends it home to my wife. My wife tries to talk to him. She calls me over and says, you need to talk to your son. Dads, that's never a good sign. My son means he won the honor roll. When she says my son, that means he did something good. When it's your son, that's never a good sign. I sat down with him and I tried to talk. After finally about several minutes, I said, "Say, go outside and play." I couldn't really tell him he'd done anything wrong. And the reality is this: I trust local teachers, local parents, local officials. If I don't like the way they're teaching homework, or if I don't like, I can at least go to the school and talk to them about it. You can't do that with the Federal Department of Education. Good luck trying to get the bureaucrats to listen to you. If I don't like my child's school lunch, I got 3 kids going to a public school, a charter school, a lab school in Baton Rouge. They used to all take their school lunch. Then it was 2, and then it was 1. The last one last year, not only would he buy the school lunch, he would insist that we send him a bag lunch as well, every day. I said, Sean, why are we sending you a bag lunch and we're buying the school lunch? I said, well, Daddy, I'm hungry otherwise. Look, this is ridiculous. I mean, my kids, it's my job, it's my wife's job to raise our kids. No, we don't let them eat junk food every day, but if one day we want to let them eat pizza, or if one day we want to let them eat some cookies, or that's fine. They play sports, it's our job to make sure they eat enough fruits and vegetables. That's our job.
Governor, you've spoken out against big government and taxing and spending and so on. As president, what would be your policy with regard to agricultural subsidies?
So agriculture is a big part of our economy in Louisiana as it is in Iowa. I'd say a couple of things. One about the ethanol in general, and then about agriculture in specific. I've said, look, if we're going to be for an all-of-the-above strategy, government has to be out of the business of picking winners and losers. I voted for the RFS, the ethanol standard, back in 2005 when I was in Congress. At the time, I thought it was a good thing to help the industry get on its feet and compete. I think it's been good for the economy, good for our energy. But I also think it's time now to try to phase it out. And the reason I say that is I didn't like Solyndra. I didn't like the government picking winners and losers. If we're really going to be for that, we have to be honest and say, okay, across the board. I say phase it out because I don't want to turn folks into losers overnight. I don't want people who have invested based on government promises to all of a sudden go from being winners to losers. I think over time, all energy sectors, including oil and gas in my state, have to give up their favorable treatment. Everybody should be treated the same. It's not just one or the other. We need clean coal, we need nuclear, we need wind, we need solar, we need ethanol, we need all of it. I'd also think the government's got a role in doing basic research into more advanced versions of ethanol as well. I think, whether it's cellulosic or whatever, I think there's some more advances that need to be done. In terms of agriculture, I think government can play a role without the annual payments. I think that there have been reforms to farm policy, which I think have been good, to say, all right, look, my state after Katrina, for example, quite frankly, Louisiana needed help to get back on its feet. Now, I don't need help every time there's a tornado. I don't need help every time there's a flood. But if there's a massive catastrophe, I think people understand that one local community sometimes needs help to recover. Not every day, not every time. I think the same thing is true when it comes to agriculture. I think there are times when you have sudden commodity crashes or you have awful weather or challenges where you say, okay, look, this isn't a routine thing. It doesn't happen every year. It's not a price support every single time. But there are times when you have wild swings where I think it is good for our country that we make things in this country. I think it's good for our country that we grow food in this country. I never want us to see us become dependent. You imagine, we already import too many things from China. Can you imagine if we become dependent on them or somebody else for our food as well? Talk about a lack of national security. So I'm not for, in general terms, I'm not for a farm policy where every single year in every instance we're always making payments. But I do think there's a role for government to say, when you have these wild swings, that we do want to make sure that we can help. And there are insurance and other programs that help farmers be self-sufficient, to help them become independent, help them to feed us. I think it's good for them, it's good for us, keeps them working in the private sector, doesn't make them dependent on government programs. So I think those are kind of fiscally responsible. I don't think we're perfect, but I think we've begun to make reforms to get us more in that direction. And I think that over time, we'll get even better in that. But again, farming is a big part of my economy. I know it's a big part of y'all's economy as well. It adds $1 billion to our economy.
Could you expand on your thoughts about replacing Obamacare?
Absolutely. So in terms of replacing Obamacare, our plan, I won't go through all the points. It's got 16 points. You can go online and see it. 3 basic principles. 1, we've got to make health care affordable. So remember, Senator Obama, when he was campaigning, said to Hillary Clinton, we don't need an individual mandate. Said to Senator McCain, we don't need a Cadillac tax. The issue is making health care affordable. He was right as a candidate, wrong as president. And so instead, you remember his plan was supposed to cut costs by $2,500 in premiums. Didn't do that. What our plan does, we repeal all of the Obamacare and instead say this. Let's give a standard tax deduction so people can buy their health care through their employers or on their own, however they choose. Create voluntary purchasing groups with ERISA-like protection. So you can buy your health care through your employer or through your church or your trade association or however you want. 3rd, we should allow people to buy insurance across state lines. So you break up the monopolies and introduce more competition. 4th, crack down on the frivolous lawsuits. 5th, expand access to health savings, medical savings, and wellness accounts. Would actually, in Medicaid, do global accounts with more flexibility for the states with accountability. In Medicare, do premium support. If you just did the first 5 things in the private sector, you could reduce, according to independent analysis, you could reduce premiums on average $5,000 for the average family. Second thing we need to do, we need to help the truly vulnerable. There are people with pre-existing conditions that can't afford health care, that can't afford the individual market. So the second thing I would do is give $10 billion a year to the states to help individuals with pre-existing conditions with things like high-risk pools, reinsurance, or other types of credit programs. 3rd and finally, you've got to give portability and choice to consumers and providers. Look, ultimately, healthcare, my background, my experience has been in healthcare, but it's really simple. It's not complicated. It really comes down to who do you trust? Do you trust individuals working with their doctors, their providers, or do you trust bureaucrats? We trust patients, they trust bureaucrats. I will say this about the American healthcare system. Churchill described democracy like this. He said it was the worst form of government except all the alternatives. That's kind of the American healthcare system. It's got a lot of problems, but when you get sick, there's nowhere else you'd rather be. People from all over the world come here to get their health care. I'll tell you, just real quick, my wife and I are blessed 3 great kids. Our middle child before he was 3 months old, needed open heart surgery to stay alive. Now, he's doing great. He's 11, he plays soccer, he tortures his brother, he does all kinds of, he's doing great. He's in great health today. But when it came time to have his surgery, there's no other place I'd want to be. I was thrilled that we had a doctor here in America, we had a hospital here in America. I never once thought, boy, I wish I could go to this other country. So as we reform healthcare, we need to take care we don't screw up what's working. Yeah, there's a lot that isn't working. We got to make it more affordable and accessible. But at its best, it is the best. The thing I worry about the most in Obamacare is it can over time erode that quality, that innovation. And that's the most important thing. We cannot afford to lose that as a country, as a society. And so ultimately, we have to trust individuals, patients and their doctors, not government, not insurance bureaucrats. I'm sorry, tell me what the Wind Protection Act is. No, if you'll afterwards, if you come tell me more about the specific legislation you're talking about, I'm happy to look at it. I'm not as aware of the act. I do think wind's an important part of our power and energy portfolio, but I'm not familiar with the specific act you're talking about. But afterwards, if you come to talk to me or one of my staff, let me know. Okay. Thank you.
Governor, what's your view on the current tax structure and the use of the IRS?
Look, the less authority you give the IRS, the better. I've got a test. No, I'm not asking you to actually go do this, but can you imagine next year when it's time to file your taxes, if you told them, wouldn't you know it, I just lost those emails, I lost those receipts. Good luck with that. So they do that. They get to keep their bonuses. We try to do that. I bet you we'd end up going to jail if we try to do that. The problem you've got is the IRS has too much discretion. Now, who would have thought? I'm not a guy that's, I don't try to tend to believe the worst in people or in government. If you'd gone back years ago and told me the IRS would be going after people for their political beliefs, if you told me the Department of Justice would be giving guns to Mexican drug cartels in Fast and Furious, if you had told me the DOJ would be suing my state because of school choice, and the list goes on and on and on, I don't know that I would have believed all that. I don't think that would happen in America. Even under a Democrat, even somebody I didn't vote for, I wouldn't think they'd actually use the IRS. But I guess we've been shown time and time again, just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, it gets worse. You think you've heard it all, something new comes out. When it comes to the IRS, and we'll come out with a detailed tax plan, just like we've done in these other areas. In general, I want a lower, flatter tax code so they don't have the discretion, they don't have the power. The last time I think we had successful tax reform in this country was in the late 80s under President Reagan, and it was bipartisan. And he made both parties give up. See, what happens is too often both parties show up and say, hey, well, look, you should give up yours, but I'm not going to give up mine. Well, that doesn't work. Both sides have to be willing to show up and say, all right, we'll have fewer carve-outs, fewer exceptions, a lower, flatter tax code, so IRS doesn't have the discretion to go and decide whether you're in or out. Otherwise, we're going to continue. Everybody thinks, well, if we just get rid of this bureaucrat and replace them with a better one, that's not going to fix things. These agencies will continue. There are two things that happen in D.C. One, the bureaucrats think they're going to outlast the elected officials. So whoever comes to power, they think it doesn't matter. We've got, civil service protection. We're going to be here forever. You guys are here 4 to 8 years. Secondly, a Republican appoints a Republican secretary or an agency head. And you think they would go to those agencies with the Republican president's vision of limited, smaller government. Instead, the cabinet secretaries, too often the agency heads, they go native. They go back to the OMB and the White House and they start arguing for more money or more power for their agencies. There's an old saying when I was in the private sector, if you buy an $800 hammer, everything begins to look like a nail. When you run one of these agencies, you want more power, more turf, more budget resources, and instead of shrinking government, you start arguing for your agency. So I think the only way to prevent these abuses at the IRS is to truly take away their discretion, minimize their power, and the only way you can do that is rewrite the tax code. The only people that like a complex tax code are the accountants that make money filling it out, and the IRS that gets to interpret it. The rest of us should realize that it's just a big drag on our economy that gives way too much power to the federal government, federal bureaucracy.
Governor, we have time for one more.
Yes, sir.
You're an advocate of term limits. I wrestle with it a little bit, and how do you not empower the bureaucrats?
No, look, it's a great question. I've gone back and forth. The reason I come down on the side of term limits, and we did them in our state legislature, and it was a big jolt. I'll be honest, my first term, for example, in my house, we had almost 50 brand new members, so it all happened at once. Now it's more staggered, but it was all at once. The reason I ended up in favor of term limits is I think that we just got to do something to break up that permanent governing class. If we don't do that, they just... They spend too many years not living under those rules or laws that they pass for the rest of us, and they start seeing their job not to represent us, but just to stay there. And that's all they do. They just do whatever it takes to stay there and stay in office. In terms of not empowering the bureaucrats, and you could also say that about the lobbyists and the others that will stay there, I think that's right. I think the only way to do that is to take power away from the government. I think the government's got way too much power over our lives today. I think the federal government is involved in things the Founding Fathers never intended them to be doing. There are a lot of bad things the federal government is doing that needs to stop. And I've talked about some of them, like the EPA and the Common Core. But there are also some things they're doing that aren't bad, and they just shouldn't be doing. And if you really believe in limited constitutional government, you think either we should be doing it for ourselves or it should be done at the local level, where there's more accountability and more responsibility. Either we believe in that or we don't. And you can't go to D.C. and say, hey, look, I've got an earmark or a special project, or I've got a special thing. And I know they've gotten rid of earmarks temporarily, but you can't go to D.C. and say, hey, I want you, when we're in power, we're going to just fund our friend's stuff. And that's what happens. The Republicans, they get to power and they say, well, I'm just going to help my side. And we criticize the Democrats for doing their projects, but we defend ours. And when they get to power, they do the opposite. If we're going to be principled conservatives, we have to say, look, this may be a good thing, but why is the federal government doing it? And the reality is they got sticky fingers. You send them $1, they might send you back 90 cents, but they're keeping part of it. And it would be a lot more efficient if you just kept your own dollars. Yeah, there was a time in this country where we celebrated the fact that we went to our families, we went to our neighbors, we went to our churches, we went to our communities. And now I think too often the first response is we go directly to government. You know, look, I'm not a no-government guy. In response to that, I think there are times when the government's got to help. Whether it was Katrina or these farm catastrophes, I think there are times, especially in our national defense, but I don't think we should be going to government every single time. And I think that is one of the things that's changed our culture. I told you the story when I was born. What I didn't tell you was there was a charity hospital down the road where anybody could go for free. Huey Long had expanded these. This one, when Baton Rouge, is actually named Earl K. Long Hospital. Anybody could go. And my parents could have gone there to have me. And there wouldn't have been a bill. And I remember when I was old enough to ask my dad, I said, well, why didn't you go there? There's no stigma. There was no, I mean, the birth certificate's the same color. It's not like they send you home in a different blanket or anything. And I love what my dad said. He'd only been in this country for several months. He goes, well, that wasn't for us. He said, that's for people who really needed help. And I love that mentality. They didn't own their home. They were both working. My mom was a student. He was working a job. There's actually a debate about whether he was there when I was born or not, because he was working a couple hours away. Now, he says, his side of the story is he gets the call, he rushes to the hospital. Back then, the men were out in the delivery room, and the women were inside the waiting room. And he says he gets back, there's nothing going on, so he goes to the flower shop to buy her flowers. The nurse comes out, he's not there. Goes and tells my mom, well, there's nobody out there. So she says he wasn't there. He says, I was there, I just went to get flowers. But anyway. I was there, but I can't break the ties. I don't know. But I love that mentality. He didn't begrudge that charity hospital for people who really needed it, but that's for people who really needed it. That's not for me. That's a cultural attitude. You almost can't pass a law to fix something. I mean, some of this is cultural, and the president has encouraged dependence in a way that's not healthy for the future of our republic. And so I think the way you disempower these bureaucrats, we've got to get back to a limited government. My first year as governor, I line out and vetoed more than my predecessors had done combined in several years. But here's the funny thing. I didn't have to do it every single year. You do it once or twice, you show them you're serious, and they stop trying. They're like, all right, well, what's the point of it? And I had a Democratic majority in my House and Senate my first term. And I said, well, what's the point of trying to pass a tax increase? He isn't going to sign it. What's the point of putting these earmarks? He isn't going to approve them. And I think we need to do that in D.C. Let me close with this observation. I'm going to stick around. My wife and I will stick around and visit. Y'all have been very patient. I know y'all have been here a while. I understand if people want to get out and enjoy their Saturday afternoon. If y'all want to continue to visit, we'll stay up here. Folks want to take pictures. If you had questions you didn't get to ask or comments. Let me close with this, where I started. This is a great country. We've talked a lot about our problems and challenges, and they're real. I don't want to minimize them. But our best days far ahead of us. I wouldn't trade places with anybody else in the world. I give thanks to God Almighty every day that you are blessed to be born in the greatest country in the history of the world. If you believe like we do, I'm asking you to believe again. I'm asking you to join a cause. Please go to bobbyjindal.com to learn more. God bless y'all and thank y'all very much.